Another witness that was basically in the same location is Beverly Oliver. Beverly Oliver was, it's getting kind of windy here, standing on the south side of Elm Street facing the grassy knoll, just in about the same spot. She was directly across from that X on the pavement. So she's right here. So she's looking straight up. She's staring virtually right at Abraham Zapruder, who is perched on that concrete pergola. If you can see that guy in the green, looks like he's wearing a green hat, and he's zipping up his jacket. He is basically right next to that concrete pergola upon which Abraham Zapruder was standing, and there's photographs showing him standing there with an assistant, somebody holding his feet. He had vertigo and he was afraid of heights. So his assistant, he was a dressmaker in town. He had his own shop. She came down to watch the motorcade with him. He was filming with his new camera, and he was standing on that pergola to have a good vantage point, which of course he had a great vantage point, directly across from Beverly Oliver, who's standing where I'm standing. So they're virtually looking at each other. And Oliver, as I mentioned earlier, was the one who saw Roscoe White right after the shooting, said it was Geneva White's husband. And I told you she'd been a dancer at the Colony Club. She wasn't a stripper, but she was a dancer, and then she worked as a hostess and other things. And the Colony Club was right next door to the Carousel Club, which was owned by Jack Ruby. And because of that, she knew Jack Ruby, and she also knew Geneva White, because Geneva White worked at the Carousel Club. And I told you the story, how they ate together, and Jack Ruby would come to their table, and Geneva and her husband Roscoe and Jack and Tippett would be there, and Lee Harvey Oswald would come in. All these people were thick as thieves, okay? Because of her vantage point, Oliver ended up being one of the closest witnesses to the shot that killed Kennedy. As you can see, I'm maybe 20 feet away, maybe. She filmed the motorcade with a Super 8 Yashica movie camera, but claimed that it was taken away by the FBI on the 25th of November, 3 days later, and she never saw it again. They said they'd return it, they didn't. And she became sort of an enigmatic figure in the whole research of the JFK assassination, because she sort of disappeared. But she was in all the pictures, and in the Zapruder film, and she was wearing a peculiar scarf like a Russian grandmother would wear. So they nicknamed her the Babushka Lady. But because she sort of disappeared into the ether after the assassination, everybody was questioning who this lady was, and might that camera she was using, could that be a special kind of gun? Was she involved in the plot? Was she part of the assassination, which is why she disappeared? A lot of speculation about this Babushka lady, who turned out to be Beverly Oliver. At least most people believe that's who it was. She never identified herself to law enforcement on the day of the assassination, and in the days and weeks following the assassination, no one turned up claiming to be her, and no film shot from her position was ever discovered. So it was like she just disappeared. Well, in 1970, 7 years after, a woman named Beverly Oliver came forward. She was interviewing with researcher Gary Shaw, and claimed to be the Babushka lady. She said, "That was me." And she tells the story how she worked for she worked next to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. She was a dancer and a singer at the Colony Club, and she knew all the people that were in the Carousel Club because she was right next door, and she fraternized with them. She hung out with them. She claims that she spent considerable time in the Carousel Club. She claims that she knew Jack Ruby very well, and of course claims that not only was Jack Ruby her Geneva White's employer, but they were friends of the family. Jack Ruby oftentimes went over to the Whites for dinner. In fact, the night before the assassination, he ate dinner there, and then the night before he killed Oswald, he ate dinner there, allegedly. Over the years, her story has been used to sort of expound upon conspiracy theories of how Kennedy was killed, and in some cases, some of the stuff has been exaggerated a little bit. But as for Oliver herself, she left Dallas soon after the assassination and went into hiding. This explains the 7 years. from 63 to 70, when she just sort of disappeared, she said she went into hiding. She said she was afraid for her life if she stayed in the city, that somebody would eventually find out who that lady was and wearing that scarf. In an interview that she later gave to Gary Mack, she claimed in 63 that she was a regular visitor to the Carousel Club and that Jack Ruby introduced her to Lee Harvey Oswald, and that David Ferry was in the club. And so the noteworthy testimony of Beverly Oliver is twofold. Number one, all these people that the Warren Commission tried so hard to random acquaintance, they weren't even acquaintances. They just got linked together because they're all involved in the same event. But Lee Harvey Oswald didn't know Jack Ruby, and Jack Ruby didn't know Lee Harvey Oswald. Turned out, according to Beverly Oliver, that wasn't true. They all knew each other. This is huge information, that all the people involved in this event were connected. Lee Harvey Oswald was connected to Ruby. Ruby was connected to Oswald. Both of them were connected to Tippit. All three of them were connected to Roscoe White and Geneva White, who knew Beverly Oliver, and David Ferry from New Orleans was involved. All these players, and they all knew each other. And the epicenter seemed to be where they all gathered was at the Carousel Club. And that's where Beverly Oliver said she saw him. She said, we all sat at the same table and ate together. So that is groundbreaking testimony right there. Another piece of groundbreaking testimony was what she said about Roscoe White. Because though we didn't find out about Roscoe White until 1990, in 60, in 70, when she's talking to Gary Shaw and Gary Mack, she tells them that Geneva White's husband, she thought as she looked across, that the shooting came from behind a picket fence, and when she ran across the street, the guy who came down the steps towards her was somebody she recognized. It was somebody she'd eaten with at the Carousel Club as best friends with Geneva White. It was Geneva White's husband, Roscoe White. So, yes, in the immediate aftermath, nobody had heard of Roscoe White or suspected any involvement on his part. So when Beverly Oliver throws his name out there, people just assume, well, he was a Dallas police officer, it was legit. But then later, when Roscoe White dies and his confession comes out and all those captions in the scrapbook come out and all the corroborating information from Lee Bowers and Ed Hoffman and Gordon Arnold and yada, 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 oh my goodness, you start putting these pieces together. And Beverly Oliver becomes another big important piece of the puzzle, corroborating the story that Roscoe White was indeed the shooter behind the picket fence. So that's the story of Beverly Oliver. There were two other prominent witnesses that were on this side of the street, and their names were Jean Hill and Mary Mormon. And actually there were three more. Let's talk about Malcolm Summers first. I think he's a pretty significant witness. Malcolm Summers was standing, if you look at the Zapruder film, you'll see him. He was standing pretty much in the same vicinity where the babushka lady, Beverly Oliver, was standing. He testified that when the shooting ended, all the people started running up the terrace. Everybody was just running around towards the railroad tracks, and I knew that they had someone trapped up there. So this is another piece of inconvenient testimony for the Warren Commission, that no one's responding to what the Warren Commission's narrative is that all the shots came from behind and above, which is the Texas School Book Depository. According to Malcolm Summers, everybody's running in this direction, up the grassy knoll, up the steps, behind the picket fence. This is Malcolm Summers' testimony. Well, Malcolm Summers claims that before the shooting, when he was watching the motorcade, he turned the camera, just like he said he turned. He was standing right here, and you can look down, you can see where the X is, and he turned as the motorcade made the turn, the 120-degree turn from Houston onto Elm, and for a split second, he was looking right where my camera is looking, right at the records building. And he said there was a gun, and there was a face with the gun. And he said that from where he was located, he saw one of the shooters. He didn't know what it was. He probably at the time thought it was a Secret Service agent or whatever. But he said, I saw the face, I saw the gun, And then I turned back towards the motorcade because it was approaching me, and I watched the motorcade. But for a split second, when I turned back, my eye caught a face in the window and a gun pointed. And later, when he was shown pictures of possible people that might be, he identified Charles Nicoletti. Charles Nicoletti. If you remember, James Files, we told the story about how James Files said Charles Nicoletti was in the records building, and he was behind the stockade fence. And Nicoletti was helping him with the assassination. And that was the first indication, but people have discounted what James Files said. But Malcolm Summers picked out Charles Nicoletti in that window as the face with the gun shortly before the shooting happened here on Elm Street. So we now know who Saul was. Remember, according to Roscoe White, Lebanon was in the Texas School Book Depository building. We now know that was Mac Wallace because of the fingerprint. He said Saul was in the records building. We now know, because of Malcolm Summers' testimony, that was probably Charles Nicoletti. And then we now know, because of the arrest record of Eugene Braden, the spotter for David Morales was in the Daltex building. And we now know, because of a lot of testimony, a lot of evidence, some confessions and some corroboration from a lot of different witnesses, that Roscoe White was behind the fence. Those are the names. I told you when I started this walking tour today, I said that by the end, you're going to know the names. So you know, Roscoe White behind the fence, Mac Wallace in the Texas School Book Depository, David Morales in the Daltex building, and Charles Nicoletti in the records building. And that is according to Malcolm Summers. Now, how about Gene Hill and Mary Mormon? Gene Hill and Mary Mormon were standing very close together. They were friends. They came together to witness this right about this spot right here, a little bit behind the X. Hill was a teacher. She came to watch the motorcade, and she brought her friend Mary Mormon, and this is about where they were standing. Mary Mormon was taking Polaroid pictures of the motorcade, and Hill was standing next to her. They're just a few feet away from where the president was when he was shot, as you can see. And both of them thought the shots had come from the grassy knoll. And as soon as the firing stopped, they both ran towards the wooden fence to help find the gunman. They took off running. I don't know what they thought they were going to do, but they took off running in that direction. According to Gene Hill, both ladies were detained by two men posing as Secret Service agents. They didn't know they were posing. They thought they were actual Secret Service agents who flashed badges at them. They searched both women, and they confiscated all their pictures that they had taken of the assassination. Not all of them. There's that famous Mary Mormon photograph as she's staring basically where my camera is staring, and it picks up faint images of a man wearing a hat, like a police hat, wearing a badge, and there's a flash of light at the end of where the muzzle flash from the gun, and it briefly, you can see the outline of what looks like to be a police officer with a badge firing at the moment that the shot was fired. And that Mary Mormon photograph has often been referred to as Badge Man, and confirms the fact that it was somebody wearing a police uniform who fired that fatal shot. And of course, we know who that someone was. It was Roscoe White. It's hard to pick it out, but if you look close enough, you can see it. She wasn't even aiming for that. She was aiming for the president's car and the president himself. But in the background, because she was right in the line of fire, was this badge man. So they didn't get that photo, thankfully. Hill gave a statement to the police afterwards, during which stated that Mary Mormon started to take a picture. We were looking at the president and Jackie in the back seat. Just as the president looked up, two shots rang out, and I saw the president grab his chest. He fell forward across Jackie's lap. There was an instant pause between the two shots, and the motorcade seemingly stopped for an instant. 3 or 4 more shots rang out, and the motorcade finally sped away. Later, to the Warren Commission, she said the motorcade came almost to a halt at the time the shots rang out, and I would say Kennedy's limo almost stopped. Of course, no one in the Secret Service or the Warren Commission or anybody in investigating this event wanted to hear that. Secret Service had destroyed all their records and maintained that the driver did what he was supposed to do. And of course, they got proven liars later when the Zapruder film came out, but they disregarded her testimony that the limo stopped. Later, a friend of hers named Shirley Martin telephoned Jean Hill. It was actually on the 25th of January 1964, so about 2 months later, and she said that Jean Hill told her that she was scared to come forward and tell what she knew, because another witness that she knew, a guy named Warren Reynolds, had been shot in the head by an unknown assailant the night before. And Shirley Martin said, Mrs. Hill told me that she and Miss Mormon had received many threatening phone calls urging them to keep quiet, and when they reported these to the Dallas police, they received an official brush-off. Mrs. Hill said Miss Mormon would not talk to me as she was much more frightened and upset over the whole thing than Mrs. Hill was. So this is why, I always get a kick out of people who say, well, if it was a conspiracy, somebody would have talked. You're talking about regular people here, a lot of them, and they're afraid for their lives. They're seeing witnesses killed. We already heard about Lee Bowers. He's run off the road, killed. And now this guy, Warren Reynolds, was shot. And we're going to hear a lot more about that going forward. And of course, in that memo, that ONI memo to Roscoe White, they told him to stay put in December in the department because there were witnesses with eyes and ears and mouths, and they're going to have to be dealt with. So people aren't stupid, and I always thought that was the flimsiest reason to say or to prove that there was no, or disprove that there was a conspiracy. Anyway, Hill's testimony to the Warren Commission caused the Warren Commission some grief, because she said that the shots came from the grassy knoll. She also said that the motorcade came to a halt, and she said that Kennedy's limo almost stopped. Those were her words. She said she claimed she heard between 4 and 6 shots, which is another problem. And so something she said in interviews later on television, she said that she remembered seeing a little white dog in the back seat of the limo. And since there was no dog in the car, a lot of people used that to dismiss Jean Hill and her testimony, thought she was kind of crazy. However, 25 years later, so 63, we talk about 88, 25 years later, it was revealed that there was a small white stuffed animal on the back seat of the car. A child had presented it to Jackie Kennedy at the beginning of the tour of Dallas, right there at Love Field, but this information was suppressed so as to discredit Jean Hill as a reliable witness. They wanted people to think she was crazy and seeing these little white dogs and stuff. Turns out she saw what she saw, right? Well, Jean Hill later was interviewed by Mark Lane, that JFK researcher who wrote Rush to Judgment, and he was asking her about her experience with the FBI. And she said, quote, the FBI was here for days. They practically lived here. They just didn't like what I told them that I saw and heard when the president was assassinated. And everyone wanted her to go on the record and do a live interview, etc., be filmed. And she just declined and declined. She says, for 2 years I've told the truth, but I have 2 children to support, and I am a public school teacher. My principal said it would be best not to talk about the assassination, and I just can't go through it all again. I can't believe the Warren report. I know it's all a lie because I was there when it happened, but I can't talk about it anymore because I don't want the FBI here constantly, and I want to continue to teach here. I hope you don't think I'm a coward, but I cannot talk about the case anymore. So that was kind of how it was left for many years. And then in 1990, Jean Hill finally agreed to work with Oliver Stone on his movie, JFK. She became a technical advisor to Oliver Stone. And in that movie, or during the course of the filming of that movie, she revealed the following about the assassination. Quote, they, talking about Secret Service agents, took me to the records building. Now this is fascinating. Jean Hill was located about right where that sign is. And after the assassination, they took her here to the records building. This is according to her testimony. It says that we went up to a room on the 4th floor. There were 2 guys sitting there on the other side of the table looking out a window that overlooked the killing zone where you could see all the goings on. You got the impression that they had been sitting there for a long time. Interesting. almost like they were overseeing the events. That was command central over all the goings on. And here she gets brought into the middle of this, and she says, they asked me what I saw, and it became clear they knew what I had seen. They asked me how many shots I had heard, and I told them 4 to 6. And they said, no, you didn't. There were 3 shots. We have 3 bullets, and that's all we're going to confirm. And she says, well, I know what I heard. And they told me, well, what you heard were echoes. You would be very wise to keep your mouth shut. Well, I guess I've never been that wise. I know the difference between firecrackers, echoes, and gunshots. I'm the daughter of a game ranger, and my father took me shooting all my life. So I find it very interesting that in the seconds and minutes after the assassination, they bring Jean Hill into basically what amounts to a command central in the same building where Charles Nicoletti has been seen with a gun. And that's where they interrogate her, and they immediately tell her it's 3 shots. There's the narrative, right? All from behind and above the Texas School Book Deposit. So that's all we're willing to commit to. That's what they say. And any shots or any noises you heard other than that were just echoes. I mean, it was instantaneous. They had this narrative and this cover story prepared in advance, and they were working hard to make sure in the immediate aftermath that anybody who contradicted that memo was shut down, was threatened, or discredited. That's the story of Malcolm Summers, Jean Hill, and Mary Mormon, and the very important Infield witnesses.